Runga.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I rise today to support this bill that will introduce rate capping into South Australia, which is a measure necessary to ease the cost of living pressure that households are feeling in this state across this state at this time. This legislation will deliver more oversight, transparency and accountability for the local government sector, and this rate capping policy, we believe, strikes the right balance between keeping cost pressures down for South Australian households and businesses, but also facilitating growth in the local government sector. This state government's priority is to keep cost pressures down, but we don't want to get in the way of growth or the delivery of productive infrastructure and necessary services. I'm sorry to say that it's a policy that has not necessarily been well received by those within the local government sector, and we heard some evidence from the member for Light to that effect, a nice wide cross-section of mayors who all oppose rate capping, surprisingly, but I have to admit it has been widely well received. Absolutely overwhelming support from within the community. Those that actually pay their rates are very fond of this policy and looking forward to its full implementation so that they can finally have some relief from the spiralling cost of living. This Act will create 3 key elements that will go toward the capping of council rates here in South Australia, the first of which will be the primary rate cap determination, or the base standard rate, which will be applied to all rateable revenue on an annual basis, and SCOSA will set that rate by 31 December each year, and it will apply to all general rates within the council region and be used for councils in their long-term business plans. The second element will be for variation applications, whereby councils can make applications to a SCOSA if they can prove that they are worthy of an extraordinary rate rise to fund a special project or a special need within their council region, so that those councils with that justifiable need are not left out in the cold and without means to fund vital community infrastructure. And the third and final element, and as important as the other two, is the monitoring and reporting of the rate oversight system to ensure both compliance and understanding of the effect of rate oversight on councils. And SCOSA will report annually on compliance to the Minister and every 2 years on the outcomes of the system. So in short, SCOSA, Mr Speaker, will be the independent regulator who will be responsible for making the rate cap determinations, receiving and assessing applications from councils for variations on the rate cap, and for reporting on compliance and the outcomes of the system to the Minister on a regular basis. As I said previously, Mr Speaker, this is a policy that has been received with overwhelming support within the community by the absolute vast majority of the population. I was inundated with support for our rate capping policy throughout the election campaign, and now that the Marshall Liberal government is in power, it is delivering it in accordance with what people want out of their government. It is my belief that this legislation should not be feared or seen as a tool that will stifle growth or cost community services. Many councils are in fact good at balancing their books and are not in the habit of implementing irresponsible and unwarranted huge rate rises, and as such it will be business as usual for these councils. Regrettably, the measure is necessary to stem the flow of irresponsible spending shown by a few councils that have tarred the brush for the whole sector, creating an unfair impost for ratepayers with huge rate rises. It is those councils that habitually pass annual rate rises of 7, 8, 9 or even 10% that has necessitated this legislation. It's a practice which is just unsustainable for the household budgets, and we believe it is this government's responsibility to protect constituents in this way. It is a reality that councils that have kept in the vicinity of CPI rises won't be impacted by this rate capping legislation should it pass, and hopefully it does. It is stressed that rate capping is not about not allowing any increases at all. SCOSA will declare, as I alluded to earlier, an allowable realistic figure based on a number of indicators and what we believe to be more than the Consumer Price Index, and look at the past year and projections ahead to determine the base standard rate. And there will also be provisions for councils who show a need for a high percentage rise within their long-term financial plan and demonstrate community support for that additional rise for it to be allowable. And SCOSA will be charged with delivering that extraordinary rise as well. This motion is about ensuring that local government sector is efficient in what it does, that it takes a good look at its expenses column as much as its revenue column. This is a means of rate justification as much as it is a means of rate capping council rates. A mere 1% drop from the overall $1 billion total council rates bucket means $10 million is placed back into household and business budgets. And that's $10 million that remains in the pockets of property owners to spend how they wish in other areas, providing growth opportunities for South Australia. I've seen firsthand the concerns that local councils have around the perception of being told what to do. But this is not about us and them attitude. It is about reducing the cost of living for the people who have to pay the bills, the people of South Australia. Rates can't just continue to go up and up when wages remain stagnant. The household sums just can't add up if that continues to happen. Over the last decade, council rates have increased at a rate that is 3 times the level of inflation, and it is simply unacceptable. South Australian households businesses have been smashed with council rate increases over double the rate of the local government price index. Over the last 10 years, local government rate revenue has increased by 67%, with a 31% increase in the local LGPI over that same period. Local government is unique in that the system allows councils to decide their spending before adjusting their income, which state governments, nor any other institution to my knowledge, is afforded that particular luxury. It is forced to cut its cloth to meet its available income. This is legislation which is in line with this government's pledge to deliver savings and reduced cost of living pressures across many areas, in ESL bills, NRM levies, payroll tax, and this also means we are having to do more with the revenue available to this tier of government. So we are all in this together for the overall good of the people of this state. The other point I make is that there is a clause to review the positives and negatives of rate capping after 4 years, and that is included to protect councils. We understand the financial pressures they face in delivering a myriad of services, and unexpected considerations do occur, such as the recent announcement from China to no longer accept recycled materials, which can blow council budgets out quickly. Cost shifting across tiers of government must also be a consideration in recognition that we are all in the same business of service delivery to the people of our state. Regional and rural councils must also be considered in all of this because generally, with the geographic tyranny of distance and roads to upkeep, jetties and ports, beaches and expanses of coast to protect, etc., they do more with less. But that cannot mean that rates keep going up and up. It is not sustainable, particularly with wages not going up and high percentages of residents as retirees and pensioners on fixed incomes. There is unrest within the community, as demonstrated by the number of ratepayer protest groups that have formed in the last couple of years. In my patch, there's a very active Adelaide Plains Residents and Ratepayers Association, led by President John Lush, and a Copper Coast Residents and Ratepayers Association in the Council of the Copper Coast. I've seen firsthand and experienced the barrage of concern some elected members and council administrators have with this legislation. In attending a recent Yorke Peninsula Council meeting where rates setting for the new year was on the agenda, I found myself amid a vocal, packed gallery, and then later standing to speak against the proposed rate rise of 11.8% for primary production landowners, because it was put to me that landowners in the YP Council pay considerably lower rates than those in neighbouring council regions, and that, quote, "we have to do this because rate capping is coming in." That high rate rise was narrowly lost in the council chamber to the relief of the gallery. But then the following week, the motion was rescinded and a special meeting was called for further discussions. Ultimately, the total general rates increase was set at 4.8%, with average residential rates up 4.05% and primary production rates up 5.77%. All discussions caused considerable community divide and unrest, which is an unfortunate thing. Local media quoted one councillor stating, in defence of not voting for the rate increase, one farmer explained to this councillor how his rates were more than $15,000 than last year, and when he heard his rates would increase by a proposed 11.8%, he was horrified. This farmer pays for his council rates each year with borrowings, which means he will also have to pay interest on those rates. This councillor said, "I do not support the gouging of ratepayers and will therefore be voting against the annual business plan in its current form." On the for side, a councillor argued agribusiness earn an income off their property and she's fighting for residential ratepayers who shouldn't be carrying the rest. Thankfully, that motion was voted down for an 11.8% rate rise, because in conjunction with the skyrocketing value of property prices within the YP Council, it's a significant impost on the owners of that primary production land, and their rates are rising quick enough already that the balance between residential rates and primary production rates as a piece of the pie is evening up, regardless of how quickly they try to artificially bring them together. There are 5 councils within the electorate in Narungga. Of the other 4, Copper Coast Council voted to put its rates up 3.8% in line with its long-term financial plan, and stated that this budget allows us to provide our community of about 14,000 with a standard equal to what they currently have. It is also very pleasing to see a show of community engagement and participation that the Copper Coast Council extended its annual business plan and budget consultation period and received 51 submissions in the process. Councillor Pope was quoted in the local media as saying this budget is all about consolidating and finishing existing community projects with a focus on road sustainability and the budget breaking even in 2 to 3 years. I congratulate the Copper Coast on these measures. It is noteworthy that this council has enjoyed a 23.5% population growth between 2006 and 2016. Just in the last financial year alone, 120 new dwellings were approved, and the previous year, 2016-17, Council approved 33 land divisions, creating 54 new allotments. Their rates revenue has steadily increased since 2015, approximately 19 million in 15-16, 26 million in 16-17, and up to 28 million in 17-18. That's not the complete story. As we're all aware, there are plenty of infrastructure costs that come with such growth, but it's worth noting that the rate revenue from the Copper Coast Council has increased by almost 10 million in 5 years. Unfortunately, the story of population growth is very different in the other councils in my area. Barunga West just broke even over those 10 years, between 2006 and 2016, not gaining or losing any. Yorke Peninsula Council dropped 1.1% population, and worst off, whilst it is outside my electorate, the District Council of Peterborough, which recorded an 11.9% reduction in population between 2006 and 2016. So considerations are different for each council, and those need to be taken into account when deciding these things. If we go back to the electorate in Narungga, Mr Speaker, Barunga West Council had adopted a 4.75% average rate rise for the new year, with a focus on roads and similar plans for an imminent break-even budget. And Wakefield Plains Council plans a 5.5% increase. In its annual business plan, the Adelaide Plains Council, the final council within the electorate of Narungga, described having adopted, and I quote, a zero-based budgeting approach where each item, line by line, has been critically analysed for relevance and necessity. Congratulate the Adelaide Plains Council on this approach, Mr Speaker, which will inevitably save costs and make it a more efficient institution. Good practice for all councils to get in, I would suggest. It was interesting too to read examples of cost-saving collaborations across fellow councils, which is more and more prevalent and a common sense approach. In one example, the Adelaide Plains Council reports that in the 14-15 financial year, Barossa Council, Town of Gawler, Adelaide Plains Council, Mid-Murray Council and Adelaide Plains commenced working in partnership to form the Barossa Regional Procurement Group, or BRPG for short. The focus of this group is to capitalise on opportunities for collaborative procurement to generate cost savings, process efficiencies and economic benefits to the region by growing local business capacity. Similarly, in 2018-19, Adelaide Plains Council is expected to deliver significant savings in curbside waste collection program due to a joint tender managed through the BRPG procurement group, which is a great outcome. In Barunga West, Mayor Cynthia Axford, in her annual business plan, described improved efficiencies showcased by collaboration with neighbouring councils during 17/18. They share services such as planning, building, environmental health and governance with the Copper Coast Council. They also work with the other Yorke Peninsula councils on joint projects and strategic plans such as regional health plans and open space strategies. The alliance between those councils is called the Yorke Peninsula Alliance of Councils, and they have been wonderfully productive in lobbying me in my short time as a member, and the previous member, Stephen Griffiths, and do a great job of advocating for their patch. So, Mr Speaker, much good work is being done by many local councils around ensuring efficiencies in all they do, but this is not so for all local councils. I wholeheartedly support this legislation, believing it will reduce the cost of living pressures for the so many who are struggling to make ends meet, and believe in doing so, the faith of ratepayers in their local council will be restored. And those who are doing the great job that they are with what they have will justifiably be recognised. So in concluding, Mr Speaker, it's disappointing that those opposite have yet to reach a decision on this proposition after a great deal of time to do so. On this side, we support this bill for the tremendous benefit it will provide the ratepayers and people struggling to make ends meet around the state. And I encourage those opposites to jump on the bandwagon, support this bill and encourage its speedy passage through this House and the other one so that we can start to lower the cost of living pressures that those in this state are feeling. After many years of rising pressures, it'll be good for some good news to come through finally. So with that, Mr Speaker, I support this bill. I commend this bill to the House.
Member for Hyson.
Mr Speaker, I rise too to support the bill. And Mr Speaker, the government has, as we know, a comprehensive reform